Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into a really interesting stack of sources you've shared with us.
Yeah, it looks fascinating.
We've got an astrology reading for a specific day, that's June 15th, 2025, and also a short story from the same source called The Day the Sky Split.
It's quite a combination. You get this sort of celestial weather report, you
Yeah.
could say, and then this narrative that seems to be speaking the same language. It's intriguing.
Absolutely. And our mission here in this deep dive is really to unpack the core themes, the insights these sources offer, especially, how they talk about navigating periods of pretty intense conflict.
Right, and that challenge of breaking free from constraints.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Breaking free to maybe potentially redefine the future. That seems to be a big part of it.
Okay. So we'll explore the specific astrological energies for that day, June 15th,
Yeah.
and then see how the story, well, how it provides this powerful, almost symbolic parallel to those forces.
And what key takeaways emerge,
Yeah,
about facing those ingrained structures and ultimately choosing your own path.
sounds good. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive in. So, the astrology for June 15th, 2025. Well, as described in the source, it sounds like anything but a quiet day.
Hmm, definitely not quiet.
It talks about sudden conflicts popping up, a lot of restlessness.
Kind of simmering energy.
Yeah, and a feeling that you're being directly challenged. Challenged to break free from limitations, assert your independence, that kind of thing.
And that intense feeling, it seems heavily influenced by two key astrological aspects the source really highlights.
Mm.
Mars square Uranus
Okay.
and Jupiter square Saturn.
Right. Mars square Uranus. But what does that energy feel like according to the source? I mean, it sounds potentially a bit chaotic.
Oh, it's certainly disruptive. Yeah. The source mentions it brings out rebellious streaks, unexpected events that can really, shake things up.
Shake things up how?
Well, it describes it as a time when it's easy to kind of jump off the rails,
Yeah.
maybe,
Yeah.
with a high potential for dramatic shows of bravado,
Mm.
or this strong urge to just let our freak flags fly, as the source puts it.
Oh, let our freak flags fly.
Yeah, there's this powerful push for disruption, for challenging the norm.
Okay, so this isn't just mild restlessness we're talking about. It's a significant push towards shaking things up, maybe even impulsively.
That seems to be the idea, and the source adds a really crucial caution here.
Which is?
Well, while this energy is liberating in a way, it warns against acting recklessly,
Yeah.
taking unnecessary risks.
Right, because it's volatile.
Exactly.
Oh.
It points out that sudden bursts of unexpected anger or frustration can lead to rash decisions. So the advice offered is to find healthy outlets for that frustration, like movement, music, or just honest conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and to really focus on learning to respond rather than just react. That seems absolutely key amidst this kind of volatility.
Responding instead of reacting. Yeah, that feels like critical advice for navigating such unpredictable energy.
Definitely.
The source also notes this energy might connect back to themes from mid-July 2024, suggesting this isn't just a one-day thing, but part of a larger unfolding process.
That's right. It hints at a longer narrative playing out.
Okay, so if Mars square Uranus is that sudden spark of rebellion, how does the source present Jupiter square Saturn? That sounds bigger somehow. It's called a clash to redefine the future.
Yeah, it is presented as something on a larger, more systemic scale,
Mm.
a clash to redefine the future. It really does sound like a major turning point or confrontation, doesn't it?
It does. What kind of clash are we talking about here? What's the source describing?
It's presented as a moment where there's this real push to reclaim emotional and spiritual sovereignty.
Sovereignty. Okay.
The source describes it as a test of faith, a test of conscience, creating a kind of deadlock. Think of it like your desire for growth and expansion. This Jupiter running headfirst into the hard reality of responsibilities, limitations, inherited structures. That's Saturn.
Ah, okay. So what might feel like a fantastic new idea or a great opportunity for growth suddenly just hits a wall.
Exactly. A wall of practical constraints or maybe established systems, rules, that kind of thing.
So it's expansion running into the forces that want to maintain the status quo. Like a fundamental conflict between the desire for freedom and the need for order.
Precisely. The source frames it just like that. Expansion versus discipline, belief versus responsibility.
Hmm.
The drive for, say, emotional security versus the challenge of raw self-leadership. It really highlights instability, particularly around things like safety, authority, autonomy, and trust.
Wow.
And this whole astrological picture, it seems to bring revelations. It pushes you, the source suggests, to see where your decisions might still be rooted in fear or control or maybe just avoiding difficult emotions.
This definitely sounds like it plays out beyond just personal feelings then. It feels like it touches larger systems.
It does, yeah. The source explicitly mentions potential conflicts and challenges involving legal systems, political systems, religious systems, suggesting a really significant social dimension to this energy.
Okay.
It points to possible leadership breakdowns, maybe widespread emotional unrest, economic growing pains.
So the energy could manifest as more forceful reactions, like people pushing back against laws or regulations they see as limiting their freedom.
Exactly. Or things that go against fundamental ideals like social justice or individual rights. That seems to be the potential flashpoint.
Wow. Okay, so this day's astrology, June 15th, 2025, it's not just about feeling a bit antsy then.
Not at all.
It's pointing to a potential moment where these really deep-seated issues of freedom, authority, security, those underlying fears are really coming to a head, forcing a confrontation with, and I'm quoting the source here, the illusions, the laws we inherited, and the outdated contracts we signed with fear.
That phrase. Outdated contracts we signed with fear. That's incredibly potent, isn't it?
It really is.
It suggests that so many of the limitations we experience, maybe individually, maybe collectively, aren't inherent truths. They're structures, agreements we've entered into based on past fears.
And the astrology for this day is essentially saying it's time to look at those fear-based foundations.
That's the call. Yes.
Yeah.
Time for an examination.
Okay, so we have this astrological picture. Intense tension, clashing forces demanding both radical change and facing reality, and this powerful call to confront inherited structures built on fear.
A complex picture.
Definitely. Now let's turn to the short story provided, The Day the Sky Split. Because reading this, it feels like it offers a narrative that somehow mirrors these very energies we've just been discussing.
It certainly feels resonant, yeah.
Hmm.
The story describes the people of Valoria living under this vast protective glass dome, built by the ancients, apparently.
Right, the dome?
It kept them safe, sure, but it also kept them contained. Inside, everything was meticulously ordered. Laws were rigid, truth was sanctioned. Even emotions, the story says, were, quote, neatly boxed.
That structure, that sense of complete containment and rigid order,
Yeah.
it really echoes the constraints, doesn't it? The responsibilities, maybe even those inherited laws the astrology mentioned.
Absolutely. And just like the astrology describes restlessness and this push for independence, the story tells of a deep restlessness stirring, especially among the young people in Valoria. They started questioning the old agreements. Why do they have to hide sorrow? Why limit dreams? Why let just one voice dictate what's true? These doubts grew, maybe unspoken at first, but they were definitely there.
Until one night, the story says the sky cracked. Not from a war, not from a storm, but from a single scream.
Yes. That's such a striking image. The story tells of Arenya, described as having this wild spirit, and she lets out a note from the Tower of Law itself, no less so pure and fierce that it actually shatters the uppermost panels of the dome.
Wow.
And fragments of long-held illusion, as the story puts it, rain down upon the city.
That feels like the sudden, unexpected event, doesn't it? The rebellious act that shakes everything up. Very much in the spirit of that Mars square Uranus energy shattering perceived reality.
It really does, shattering the illusion that connects directly back to the astrology's call to face illusions, face the fears.
So what happened after the dome cracked open? Chaos.
Well, the story describes a period of intense clash and uncertainty. Yes, some chaos. Some people immediately embraced the new freedom, started tearing down the remnants of the old structure.
Right.
But others, terrified by the unknown void above them, the open sky, they clung even tighter to the crumbling past.
Understandable, I suppose. The fear of the unknown.
Exactly. And the council, the leadership, demanded a return to order while the people cried out for sovereignty. This mirrors that tension the astrology described with Jupiter square Saturn, that struggle between the forces pushing for growth and freedom and those clinging to the old ways, the old authority.
And then we meet Drenner. He's one of the counselors, right? Caught between his duty to the old order and some kind of buried longing of his own.
Yes, Drenner. He's the one who calls for a reckoning, right there under that wounded sky.
His speech sounds pivotal.
It really is. It captures the essence of the conflict perfectly. He frames it as standing at a crossroads, the comfort of old chains versus the uncertainty of open skies. Laws made from fear versus lives lived from truth. Power held by a few versus freedom for all. He lays out the stark choices.
And then he asks that question, the one that really defines the entire moment for Valoria.
The big one. Do we rebuild the dome Or do we learn to live under the stars?
Chills. That question, do we rebuild the dome or do we learn to live under the stars? It just perfectly encapsulates the core tension, the core choice presented in both the astrology and the story, doesn't it?
Absolutely perfectly. It's not just about the act of breaking free, that initial shattering moment. It's about the fundamental decision that follows.
Right. What do you do next?
Exactly. Will you seek to recreate the contained structure, even if it was based on illusion or fear because it felt safe? Or will you step out into the raw, potentially chaotic, but ultimately free experience of being under the stars?
The story says the decision wasn't actually made that day.
No, not immediately.
But the act of asking the question, Drenner asking that question, fundamentally shifted their world. Rebellions quieted down as people began searching for deeper meaning, apparently.
Yeah, it changed the conversation. Old structures didn't just crumble. The story says they dissolved, replaced by genuine debate and difficult honesty, which sound like a much healthier, though probably harder, process.
Definitely harder.
And over time, they learned. They learned to navigate the new reality. The story mentions learning to dance in storms, to speak their fears openly.
Instead of boxing them up?
Right, and to build new symbols of what mattered to them, letting the old icons lose their power. Chaos did visit them sometimes, the story acknowledges.
Sure, because life under the stars isn't always calm.
Exactly.
Well,
But it no longer held the same terror, the story says, because they remembered what it was to belong not to rigid laws, but simply to life itself.
wow. That journey described in the story, learning to live openly, facing uncertainty, finding meaning beyond the old structure, it feels like the narrative embodiment of confronting those outdated contracts signed with fear.
It really does. And it brings us directly to the story's core moral, which the source articulates quite clearly. It says, "There comes a time when the contracts we inherited must be broken."
Must be broken.
Yes, not necessarily out of hatred for the past or rejection, but out of a profound honesty.
Honesty.
And this is done, the moral suggests, to reclaim the raw, messy, sovereign right to choose your own future.
That feels like the perfect synthesis of everything we've discussed. You've got the astrological call to confront inherited fears and structures,
The Mars-Uranus disruption, the Jupiter-Saturn reckoning.
and the story's powerful narrative of shattering the dome, Arenya's scream, and facing Drenner's choice between rebuilding or living under the stars.
Yeah, the dome versus the stars.
And finally, the moral about honesty and reclaiming sovereignty. They all seem to speak to the same fundamental challenge, don't they?
They really do. Both the astrology and the story point to this moment of necessary reckoning, a point where the tension between what was given to you, what was inherited, the structures you live within, and what feels truly authentic becomes just too strong to ignore.
And it's about choosing a potentially difficult truth over the perceived safety of old chains, even if those chains feel familiar.
Exactly. Familiarity versus authenticity, perhaps.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap the journey we've taken here. We explored the intense energies described in the astrology for June 15th, 2025, that sudden, disruptive potential of Mars square Uranus,
Yeah, the call to break free, maybe impulsively.
and the deeper systemic clash asking us to redefine the future under Jupiter square Saturn, the expansion versus limitation dynamic.
Right. And then we saw how the story of Valoria and the day the sky split provides such a powerful narrative mirror to these forces.
It really does, illustrating that struggle between living under a limiting, controlled dome
Yeah.
and the potential chaos, but also freedom of living under the stars.
And the story highlights this so well through Arenya's courageous, disruptive act at Scream, and then Drenner's pivotal world-shifting question.
Yeah. So the core message drawn from both these sources feels clear and pretty urgent, actually.
What would you say it is, boiled down?
I think it's that there comes a time when you simply must face the inherited contracts that define your reality, the domes you live under.
And importantly, not out of rejection or hatred for the past.
No, exactly, but out of a radical commitment to honesty, to what feels true now.
And that's the tough, the sources suggest, to reclaiming your sovereign right to choose your own future.
Even if that future feels uncertain, messy, requires learning to dance in storms, as the story says.
It asks you to look closely, really closely, at the foundations upon which your life and the structures you inhabit are built. Are they built on fear or on something else?
Which leaves us and leaves you with a really powerful question to consider, doesn't it? Drawn directly from the heart of these sources, from Drenner's pivotal moment.
The final thought to take away?
What are the domes, the protective but limiting structures, or the inherited contracts in your own life that might need to be examined right now? And perhaps the bigger question, Are you ready to learn to live under the stars?
Something to carry with you, definitely, as you navigate your own path forward.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.